welcome to Just Energy Radio with your host, naturopath and medical intuitive, Dr. Rita Louise. We have learned from Einstein's theory that matter and energy are one. Physicists believe that all systems in nature have their own particular way of vibrating. From the swinging of a pendulum to the waves of the ocean to the light that brightens the sky each day, each of these oscillates at its own unique rate. The same holds true for every thought, feeling, event, or word we speak. Each has its own frequency or rate of vibration. What many of us don't realize is when we take everything in our universe down to its simplest form, it is all just energy. Join Dr. Rita Louise on a journey through time and space where past, present, and future collide. Today, what you believe may be called into question. What we want to know is, who made up the rules? Be brave and step outside the box. We are about to turn our world upside down and venture into the unknown. Hold on. We are departing our own beliefs and entering alternative realms. Enjoy the possibilities.
Hello and welcome to Just Energy Radio. I'm your host, Dr. Rita Louise, and thank you all for tuning into the show tonight. We are UFOs and extraterrestrials all night long. In the first hour, we're talking with Tom Carey about his new book, The Children of Roswell. And in the second hour, we have Patty Greer coming back on to give us an update of what's happening in the crop circle world. Just Energy Radio is brought to you by soulhealer.com, where you can find out about all the products and services I offer, including medical intuition evaluations, energy healings, and psychic readings. It's also brought to you by the Institute of Applied Energetics, where you can jumpstart your intuition today by downloading their free 50-page guide. Let me tell you a little bit about Tom and get him on the air. Tom Carey began investigating aspects of the Roswell incident in 1991 for the Roswell investigative team of Kevin Randle and Don Schmitt, and since 1998 has teamed exclusively with Don Schmitt to continue a proactive investigation of the case. Tom has authored or co-authored more than 40 published articles about the Roswell events of 1947 and has contributed to a number of books on the subject. He has appeared as a guest on many radio and television shows throughout the country, including Coast to Coast AM with Art Bell and George Norrie, Fox and Friends, Comcast Network Friends, and Larry King Live, and has contributed a number of Roswell-related documentary on-screen and behind the scenes. His webpage is roswellinvestigator.com. Please welcome the author of the new book, Children of Roswell, Tom Carey. Hey, Tom, how are you doing?
Dr. Rita, nice to be with you.
It is nice.
You?
I am doing great. It's nice having you back on the show, and I'm very intrigued by your new book and new title. But let's start here. I think everyone listening to this show knows, the basic information about the Roswell crash and the events that happened in 1947. What I want to know is, why has this event had such a legacy? It doesn't really ever want to go away or go out of the public eye. What's with that?
Well, I can only speak for myself. Is that when I started the active investigation with Randall and Schmitt back in 1991. My mandate was to investigate one little aspect of the case, thinking, well, that's once I was done that's it, And well, here it is, almost 25 years later, and I'm still on the case, and it's one of those mysteries that it's like the Titanic. The Titanic saga just never goes away, even though it's over 100 years ago, because once it piques your interest, I've never lost interest in it. And the same for Roswell. It's one of those events that you keep wanting to know more and more new information about. And our new book, which you mentioned, actually goes to the printer tomorrow. We completed the manuscript, and we had the final, what they call the final author read, which I finished yesterday, and it goes to the printer actually tomorrow. It will be out in February. So just to get the timeline.
But it was scheduled to be out at the beginning of the month or the end of last month, wasn't it?
There were several delays in it. I had a death in the family, and we had a big event down in Mexico City in May, and we just had a number of things that delayed it. And we signed the contract, and our publisher was very accommodating, and they said, "Well, it's do or die now." So we did finish it, and it's going to be a real good book. It's a little different than the books that just say, okay, here's the timeline, and this on such and such a date this happened, and such a date that happened. It has a lot more character development. This is a nonfiction book, of course, and it has a lot of character development for some of the, don't want to call them characters, but some of the players in the book, like Frank Kaufman, especially the children. And it's just a very interesting read and a lot of new information. So,
well, and that is the one thing that's interesting about Roswell is, it's 70 years old, and new information seems like it keeps coming up.
Well, it wouldn't keep coming up if we didn't investigate, because
okay,
if you're an investigator or an armchair investigator, it's not going to happen. You have to be out there shaking the tree, so to speak. Otherwise, it's not going to find you be sitting behind your desk, not doing anything. So the reason we have new information is because we keep shaking the tree, and so knows somebody who knows somebody, and we keep finding new information. And we have new witnesses, and we have a lot of new information about some of the old witnesses. Some of them who we think, for instance, Frank Kaufman. We tell the complete Frank Kaufman story. Frank was a fellow, passed away in 2001, but for a period of several years in the 1990s, let's say for about 10 years, so starting about 1991 to 2001, he was a prime inside witness to all of the events. And the thought started creeping into our minds that, geez, what is this guy? Is this guy real? I mean, he seemed to know everything, but some of the information that he was giving us did not jive with what others were saying. So we came to the conclusion, well, is this guy real and everybody else is wrong? Is he a hoaxer, or is he a disinformation specialist? So we go into that whole story about Frank Kaufman. And in 1994, Randall and Schmidt wrote a book called The Truth About the UFO Crash at Roswell, and Frank Kaufman was the central character. And we go into the whole story of Frank Kaufman, and we come to a conclusion. And I don't want to give things, I want the people to buy the book, and we do come to a conclusion about Frank Kaufman because we were there at his on his deathbed by his side, wanting him to give us the lowdown with, Frank, was it true what you were telling us? Blah 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 blah. Anyway, we tell the whole story, and this is all new information.
But that's pretty cool. Yeah.
That's just one chapter. The whole chapter is about Frank Kaufman. We also tell the story. Mac Brazel had several children, and the ones that were still alive when the investigation began have all been interviewed, except one. That was a brother, brother of a son of Brazel's called Paul, really never wanted to be interviewed. But there was another son named Vernon who was 7 years old at the time of the Roswell incident, and he was never interviewed because he disappeared in 1960 when he was, somewhere around 20. Let's see, if he was 7 years old before, so somewhere around 20 years old, he disappeared. 1960, and that's before any of us ever heard about Roswell. Well, we found him, and we have a whole chapter about him, the missing Brazel boy, and it's quite a story. It's quite a story, and I don't want to give everything away.
All the dirt, but that's. And, and I'm going to accept that from you. Usually I'm like, no, I want the meat. But I'm going to let you have a pass today, Tom. But let me ask you this. Why the children? They didn't really have anything to do with, the hands-on investigation or, they weren't covering the crash. So why focus on the children?
The children, some of the children were involved, like D. Proctor was with Mac Brazel when he stumbled upon the sheep pasture full of wreckage. D. Proctor was with him, and we have a whole chapter about him because he never wanted to be interviewed, and he never really gave a full-fledged interview. But we did a lot of character development about D. Proctor. He passed away in 2006 at the age of 66. And we give the whole story about D. Proctor. And, of course, his mother, Rita Proctor, who was a fount of information about the case. And we develop some of these witnesses, these children, if they were threatened and their lives were ruined. It's just amazing, and so we go into we keep the focus on the children and how they reacted, because a lot of the children they might not have been around at the time, but their parents were. And in the one case, I'll just give you one case here, is a child who his father in 1947 was worked for the railroad. He was a scheduler, and out at the old base, the old Roswell Army Airfield, which became Walker Air Force Base in 1948 and closed in 1967. He was a scheduler, and there was a little rail line, a railroad spur that ran right beside the big hangar there, where all of the wreckage was brought from the crash site, and the bodies were first brought there too. Everything came from the field into the big hangar. The big hangar is still there, by the way. It's still a functioning hangar, and this little rail spur. We have several witnesses who recalled loading wreckage onto boxcars that were parked at that little rail spur, which then departed for parts unknown. But we know where they went. But in this one instance, the scheduler, he's standing by the rail car, and they're putting all that stuff in. And finally, they close the door, and they say. And he has them sign off on it, on the sheet of everything that went in there. And he noticed that when the airman closed the door to the boxcar, that a piece of something fell to the ground that the Air Force fella didn't notice. And he's saying, geez, I hope he doesn't notice, because if he doesn't notice, I'm gonna see what that was. And so the train pulls out, and the airman goes back to the hangar, and the scheduler, he goes over, and he looks around, and nobody's watching. He takes a shoe, and he stomps on it to press it into the dirt, to press press this piece of whatever it was into the dirt so nobody would see it. Well, later that night, he comes back, and he's got a flashlight, and this rail spur is actually outside the gate. I mean, it's not on the base. It's very close to the hangar, but it's outside the base. So he's not on the base. It's outside the base, just outside. So he's looking around, and there it was. Nobody had found it. So he picked it up, put it in his pocket, and home he went. Well, the story jumps to about mid-1950s, and they give his son a birthday present. It's a little box, and that's all they would tell him. They gave him this little box for a birthday present. The kid's about 12, 13, 14 years old, still a youngster. And in the box is this piece of, looks like aluminum, but it's folded up, it's in this little box. He said, "Dad, what is this? Is this my present?" And he says, "Well, you grab a hold of that and wad it up in your hand." He says, "Okay." So he wads it up in his hand. He says, "Okay, now let it go over the table," and it just floats down to the table, and it opens up, unfurls itself without a crease. And of course, they can't cut it, burn it, deform it in any way. Well, the kid actually was a magician. He fancied himself as a budding magician. He had a little show that he put on for the neighbors, and the father had built the kid in a little clubhouse in the backyard for him and his friends, where they had this little club, and he would put on a little magic show. Well, turns out that he saved his best trick for the last of his magic shows. At the end, he would always take out this little piece of, we call it memory metal. It's from the wreckage, and it's it just can be deformed, but it always unfurls without a crease. And that would be the main boffo moment of his magic show at the end. Well, at some point, some of the word got around, and some of the adults started coming around to this kid's little magic show, and they were mesmerized by this little thing at the end of the show, this little piece of metal that would sort of just hang in the air a little bit and float down, and then just flatten out, and nobody could figure out what that was. Well, at some point, you say, okay, well, where is that today? Does he still have it? Well, in talking to the child, the parents are dead, of course. The child is now a grown man in his 50s, close to 60, and he said, well, one night, one day he went to the little clubhouse, and the little box was gone. Apparently somebody was watching. Somebody got the word that this kid had something that resembled what the authorities knew was from the wreckage of the flying saucer back in 47, because it was stolen away. But they don't know who did it, but that sort of killed the end of the magic show, because somebody took it without anybody knowing who it was. So that's just that's sort of an interesting story, and we got it from the son, the boy who's now grown. But it's one of those frustrating things is everybody that we talk to that has had a piece of this metal, it's always disappeared. And one of those frustrating aspects of this whole Roswell story is that, oh, yes, we used it as a doorstop, or, oh, yes, we had it on the top of the television set for years. Well, where is it now? And it's always that it's disappeared. They moved, and it got lost in the move and things like this. But this one was an interesting story in that the kid, for some time, put on this magic show until the adults started coming around, and then the thing disappeared.
Well, and I think it's interesting because if I'm not mistaken, it wasn't until the 60s that there was a resurgence in interest in Roswell, and probably by that time, they were all these memories instead.
Dr. Rita, I myself never heard about Roswell until 1980 when the first book came out. I mean, Roswell in Project Blue Book, the Roswell file was just one single newspaper clipping. It wasn't in the Roswell, not the Roswell, but the Project Blue Book files released. Outside the original excitement surrounding the story when it happened in July 1947. Outside of that, the story was killed in the press. The airmen involved were threatened with jail time in Leavenworth if they ever spoke. And the first-hand witnesses, many of them were threatened with death if they spoke about it. So the story died within days. And it didn't resurface again until 1978 when Jesse Marcel Sr.
Okay.
Until 1978, he was operating a ham. He was on the ham radio network, and he was the intelligence officer at the old Roswell base in 1947, and he was the first military person out to the crash site. And he, through his son, Jesse Jr., Jesse told us that his father, from the very first, believed that it was a crashed flying saucer, as they called them back then. So,
what I was thinking was, if the people that had these pieces knew that, this little piece of metal could be valued like a Tiffany lamp, an original Tiffany lamp, or the Hope Diamond, because it was just bring so much evidence and, rarity to the forefront, I don't think they would have used them as doorstops.
Well, that's another, again, this was another child of Roswell. His father was a policeman. And one day he came in, this was at the time of the crash, he came home one evening with this piece of, it was like rectangular, it was like a 1 inch by 4 inches, 1 inch thick, 4 inches wide, and maybe a foot long. But it was heavy as all get out. And they said, "Dad, where did you get this?" He said, "Oh, a flying saucer crashed north of town." And they used it as a doorstop for years. And of course, my next question is, where is it? Can I see it? Where is it? He says, "Oh, well, we used it as a doorstop for years, but we moved several times, and somewhere in one of the moves, it probably got thrown out." And stuff like that. And for an investigator, you talk about you at the one moment your hope is built way up, and then it's like a balloon where the air comes out when they say, "Oh, we don't know where it's at." So
that's crazy. I like collecting antiques and stuff like that. So just the thought of something so rare and so precious just being lost, just
because at the time, what happened was when the Air Force declared it a weather balloon, the story died. And unless you were one of the first-hand witnesses that saw the bodies and perhaps some of that strange wreckage, the story died with everybody else. So when he said, "Oh, the flying saucer crashed north of town," well, the rest of the family's probably thinking, "Oh yeah, it's that weather balloon." So they didn't think any more about it. But when he described it to me, I said, "Oh, that sounds like I said, sounds like your father got to the crash site in an official capacity, and he picked up a piece of the wreckage." And so we have a lot of stories like that have never been published before, but we do a lot of character development, especially with Frank Kaufman and Dee Proctor and Vernon Brazel and the Brazel family. Oh, and Sheriff Wilcox, there's a whole chapter on the Sheriff Wilcox family with new information about him that that is very, very interesting.
So what was his role in the whole thing?
I'm sorry?
What was his role in the whole thing? Sheriff Wilcox.
Sheriff Wilcox made a big mistake, and he even admitted he made a mistake. He said if he had it to do over again, he would have never sent Brazel, the rancher who first found the stuff and had come into Roswell to find out what it was and to get somebody out there to clean it up. He said he would have never sent Brazel to the air base. He would have called the press in first, because the press would have found out, would have told, what it was before the military got there. By the time the military would have got there, if the press got there first, well, the story would have been out. But the military gets there first, and they seal off everything, threaten everybody, and put the clamps on the story, and then say it was, the men of the 509th, these are the people that ended World War II with dropping atomic bombs on Japan. They made a mistake. It wasn't an interplanetary spaceship at all. It was a rubber weather balloon. Now, you have to think about that one. Here you got the 509th Bomb Group in Roswell with their fingers on the atomic trigger. That's their sole mission. Why the group was created was to drop the atomic bomb. It's still in existence today at Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri, and it's still their mission. Their sole mission is to drop nuclear bombs in time of war. Well, back in 1947, World War II was just over, and they relocated to Roswell. And if you think about it, here's a group that they have their fingers on the atomic trigger, and they can't tell the difference between an interplanetary spaceship capable of traveling the universe and a piece of rubber and balsa wood and twine. They can't tell the difference between that, and you want their fingers on the atomic trigger? I don't think so. So, but that once the Air Force came out with that weather balloon story, the media is only too happy to kill it, because they don't like having to cover stories like that. And if you notice, even today, Dr. Rita, the mainstream media, whenever they cover a UFO story, it's sort of tongue-in-cheek, It's still tongue-in-cheek. It's one of those taboo subjects with the mainstream media. Oh, yes, on cable, there's lots of, UFO stories. There's search for aliens and stuff like that. There's a lot of UFO stuff on cable, but the mainstream media, like the New York Times, Washington Post, LA Times, CBS, NBC, ABC, CNN, Fox, they don't like to cover, let's call it the paranormal, because they depend on their credibility for readers and viewers. And the paranormal is one of those areas that if you cover it, you better do it tongue-in-cheek, or else you're going to say, oh, that's a newspaper that they cover flying saucers. So that's just the way it is, and it goes all the way back to the Roswell case when they killed it. So the General Ramey, the architect of the killing the story, he was the commanding officer of the 8th Air Force in Fort Worth, the Mighty 8th, which was the Air Force command in Europe that bombed Germany into submission. General Ramey went on the radio right after they put out the weather balloon story, and he said over the radio that, this whole UFO thing, there's been UFOs reported in every state except Kansas. And you know what Kansas is? It's a dry state. So the conclusion was that if you are reporting UFOs or flying saucers, as they were called back then, you're drunk. So that was, it was killed in the press. The people didn't want to be associated with a joke, and that's the way it remained until Jesse Marcel in 1978 broke silence and started telling about the flying saucer wreckage that he had handled. And he was interviewed. I think Stanton Friedman interviewed him. I think Leonard Stringfield interviewed him. And that began the civilian investigation of the Roswell incident, as it's called, starting in 1978. And I didn't hear about it until 1980 when the first book came out. But I know this. When I read the book, I was blown away. I said, oh, my goodness, here is a mystery, a story that we're talking about a nuts and bolts alien craft with bodies and a cover-up and death threats and all that sort of stuff. And it's one of those stories that has everything. And I think that's why it is still around, is because the payoff at the end is a nuts and bolts alien ship and biological bodies and a government cover-up that we hope that our books are shedding light on. So that's why I believe it's still one of those subjects that people are still interested in. Unfortunately, we've known many of the participants, and all but a handful are gone now. And it's very sad to us when we travel down to Roswell that most of the people that we used to know about regarding the case are no longer with us.